I inherited this problem when I came on board with the city, and it is most certainly not sustainable. As part of the plans that we'll go over in a little bit later, we're going to build an actually pretty modern trash enclosure with drainage, so it meets all our stormwater requirements, and we can get this stuff out of there. I mean, there's critters over there for sure, and that's not really the issue. The real issue is just the closeness to the riparian area. Next slide, Doug. So this is our proposed site plan, and I think I did walk you all through this a little bit last time. The trash enclosure that I just discussed is in the center of the roundabout, kind of in the upper right-hand corner of the project. Directly to the south of that is our proposed our stone structure, so a fabric tension building. And then we're gonna have paved parking lots for both city vehicles and for employee parking. So we don't have to park our city vehicles in the dirt anymore. Along with that, we're also going to be keeping a small little barn that we've been rehabilitating on the eastern edge of the property, and also still inhabit we call it the farmhouse that some of you have seen. I believe a couple of the commissioners have seen our situation out here, but we don't have any plans to move out of there in the immediate future. And then really the two major aspects besides that are the fencing plan that Doug walked you through earlier on the northwestern corner of the property and around the frog pond, and the paved driveway leading from Stone Pine Road to our access gate. There is some stuff that Dr. Mark Jennings will be talking about with y'all later, and I believe that's we call it the toad tunnel. I don't know if there's a technical term for that, but that's the wildlife corridor that goes underneath the road. He can definitely talk more about that later. And I think that's about it. Sorry for the poor quality. We're trying to blow it up the best we can. And this is just a blow up of the actual site itself. So again, the farmhouse is all the way to the right. We're showing some tree plantings. As Doug discussed earlier, we are going to have to remove a few trees. So currently we have 12 trees shown on the plan. We can probably up that number a little bit. Solar array in the upper left-hand corner, and 2 parking lots directly below that, along with our sprung structure to the right of that. That's a 6,750 square foot building that we will delineate 2 separate dedicated rooms, one for paint and one for fuel storage. The fuel, I've been working with our safety / OSA compliance people so that we can actually raise the fuel off of the ground to get it a little higher in the air to prevent against any incidents that might happen in the future. We can probably discuss that a little bit later. And Doug, is there one more slide for me? This is a blow up of the actual building itself that we'll be putting up. The peak of the building is a shade under 24 feet tall. It's 23, 8 and some change. And you're going to have a hard time seeing this on here. I think the plans are a little better, but the 2 rooms that I just mentioned in the previous slide are in this upper left-hand corner right here. And it's also going to have 2 service doors on it, so we can drive our vehicles in and out of there, pick up their supplies. The crew can pick up their supplies for the day, whatever they may need undercover. They don't have to worry about the elements, and then they can get out to the job site and get whatever they need done. Doug, is there one more slide for me? Yeah, building. So that's a kind of like an artist rendering of the actual structure itself. Finally, timeline and obligations. Work began on design and entitlements in 2020. The process really evolved and came to life and grew legs in 2021. Hundreds of hours have been spent on this project by both city staff, CDD staff, public works staff, and the awesome consultants that we've had helping us out on this project. Some of them are going to be speaking later, and I just think it's important that I give them their due credit now. So I know Jessica Henderson McBean is here with us this evening. Dr. Mark Jennings is here with us this evening. They're both on the biological side, and Mark Schatz is our principal architect, and all of them have been more than amazing in supporting us on this project, and we couldn't have done it without them. So that's my special shout out to them. The heavy project focus on environmental impacts and mitigation. So we did have significant amount of consultant time dealing with all this and making sure that we were getting this right. We wanted to make sure that there was no issues with this project, and Personally, I think we've done a good job, but we can certainly discuss that later. The BRE for this site was completed in June of 2021, peer reviewed by SWCA in August of the same year. And as Doug and I mentioned, Planning Commission study session was August 24th of last year. The ISM&D was circulated early this year in January of 2022. We briefly touched on the comments received, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion of that later. The city is obligated to draw loan proceeds for this project by August 22nd of this year. That is a condition of the loan that was granted to the city to purchase this property through the California iBank. So if approved, there's obviously the appeal periods that we're going to have to deal with. The bid process is expected to take 4 weeks, possibly maybe another week on there just for good measure, depending on everything. Mobilization and scheduling will affect the project timeline. And construction needs to be completed by the end of July in order to meet our obligations to the lender. The only reason I mentioned these last couple items is because we're really up against it. And it's going to be tough getting all of our timelines and obligations met, but I'm fairly confident that we're going to be able to do so. I think that's about it. I don't think you guys want to hear me talk about coastal development permits and LCPs. So I'm going to turn it back over to Doug. And thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you, Todd. Very informative. Just to summarize, this project does require a coastal development permit, architectural review, and a tree permit. The main issues that we look at from a planning perspective are consistency with the general plan, our local coastal plan, the zoning ordinance, and that's a broad range of areas, they're addressed in detail in the reports. I'm just going to focus in the presentation on a couple of the key areas, which are natural resource protection and visual resources. For visual resources, this was an early architectural rendering. I would note that the trees in the foreground are artistic license, so you can see the building. The double row of cypress trees out there is quite thick, and from this angle, I don't think you could even see the building that's here in the background. But it does give a good perspective on the size and the materials. We also had SWCA, the consultant that prepared our CEQA document, prepared independent visual simulations. Those are included in the CEQA document. For the most part, you can't see this project, like I said, from Highway 92 because of the cypress trees. This is standing more or less in front of the driveway that goes into the property adjacent the Spanish Town commercial shops and industrial area. And this open area, PG&E had a pipeline safety project where they cut down about a total of 11 trees along the Highway 92 frontage adjacent to 880 Stone Pine. And that's why you have this open clearing here. But if you look, they put in the building. You can see it's fairly low on the horizon, doesn't really extend up against the hillsides. The site is probably 10 feet below Highway 92, so you're looking down, which reduces the massing. I would note that some of the stuff in the foreground is existing, these culverts and machinery. Most of this would go away. It would be stored inside the building, so it would be much less cluttered looking. When PG&E removed these trees, they, as a condition of approval, they agreed to pay for a total of 33 new 24-inch box-sized trees on this property, not as a biological resource mitigation, but as a visual resource issue, so that the city has discretion as to the types of trees and the planting. PG&E has funded that. The city has the money. So as Todd mentioned, we do have 12 trees right now in the landscaping plan. I think one thing to consider as we assuming we stay farther away from this gas pipeline than where these trees were planted originally, this is an area where we could potentially plant, a few trees in here. We have, oh gosh, about 20 trees that have been paid for that we don't have on the landscaping plan. So we do have some flexibility there. The story poles don't show up real well in this photo, but I'll point out a couple of things. The story poles are really the proof that the visual simulations and architect's rendering were accurate. And this is, if you look at the ridge line of the new building, it's pretty consistent with what they showed. This flat roof thing is the new trash enclosure. The roof's a little bit high because they do have to get heavy equipment and, garbage trucks to haul out dumpsters and stuff in there. So it's a little bit higher profile. But if you look on the site plan, this is an area where we are planting trees around the parking lot and this enclosure. The solar panels are up here and you really can't see them from anywhere unless you're on the site. I included this one. This is right in the middle of the site, and I just wanted to show that these storage containers, they're actually in the footprint of where the building will go. So just to clarify that a lot of this area is being used, it's been disturbed, and we really just take all this scattered stuff and put it inside the building. It's not really expanding outward a lot. So as we get into the natural resources, CEQA, there's a couple of important considerations. One are the existing conditions and discussion of what the CEQA baseline is, what is ESHA, what are the required buffers around environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and what are the impacts. And this was covered in more in-depth in our response to California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the supplemental report for this hearing. But it's important to remember that the baseline has a very specific definition under CEQA, and that's what's on the ground when you start your environmental assessment. Corporation Yard has been there for 18 years. That is the baseline. So when we measure impacts, it's how are we changing that baseline? And that's why this is almost not a project under CEQA, because we're not increasing the number of vehicle trips or employees or the intensity of activity there. You could almost say it's on balance a net benefit to the environment. But we did prepare the CEQA document. It's pretty thorough. It addresses potential impacts to biological resources, as extensive mitigation measures to ensure that we don't have significant impacts. This I'm including because one of the commissioners, I think, correctly noted that it's a little bit difficult from the site plans we have, to interpret where ESHA is, where the buffers are, the conservation trail easement. So this is something we put together in color. It's attached to the supplemental report. A couple of points of note. This bluish color, that's the 50-foot riparian setback buffer. So Pilarcitos Creek is down here. This is 50 feet. The yellow is conservation trail easement that we are required to record as a condition of purchasing this property. And that's typically 100 feet wide. And you'll note that it's extends much further than the riparian setback. And we have no plans to develop anything in this easement at this time. So in effect, the riparian setback is substantially more than 50 feet. This abandoned ag pond up in the corner here, that's classified as a wetland. It has a 100-foot buffer around it, the red area. Along the property lines, it's less than 100 feet to the property line, so that's why it's a little bit shorter on these sides. Again, this was a little bit older drawing that shows the 50-foot wide corridor green connecting the pond with Pillarcitos Creek. A little bit later on, we'll discuss if that's the option the Planning Commission wants or if they like the one where we've modified that. And we have all of our biologists available, and they can comment on that as we go. This is the pond. And, you know, I took this photo, I think a couple of years ago when I was working on the PG&E project. And one of the things to realize is that when this was being actively used for agricultural purposes, it probably didn't look like this. The farmers are exempted from a lot of requirements that we're subject to. And so a lot of this vegetation probably wasn't there. They would have cleared it out. They may have mucked out the pond from time to time to keep the water capacity up. The other factor was they had a pump here. They were pumping water from Pillarcitos Creek up into the pond. That pump has been vandalized, removed. I'm not sure what, but it's not functional. And so through benign neglect, essentially since Post bought the property, a lot of this vegetation has grown in just because nobody's been bothering it over that time. And that, in some ways, turns it into Asia, which is what we're dealing with, that if we had continued actively farming this property, we would have more flexibility as to what we do with this pond, but we don't have a lot of flexibility today. This is the unpaved access road. This is the southern leg that runs. You can see the creek riparian vegetation comes almost right up to that road. Very distinct. With the project, this dirt road would be abandoned. The conservation easement and the riparian setback would extend out into this disturbed area. A lot of this would be enhanced over time, just again, through us moving out of there with our activities. I would note there are existing overhead utilities in here. They serve not just this property, but they continue on to other properties on both sides of Pillarcitos Creek. So we would have to have access for utility maintenance, PG&E and telephone companies to get in there from time to time. So just the chronology of what we went through for environmental review. We had a consultant, H.T. Harvey, prepared a biological resources report. Per the requirements of our land use plan, our zoning ordinance, we sent that to a variety of different agencies, including California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the purpose of that is to get early feedback before we start our CEQA review. If they have concerns, we want to see that early in the process so we can modify the project, so we can design our mitigation measure on that. And I would point out we received no comments from these agencies other than the Coastal Commission, and their comments were pretty general, and they were addressed through clarifications of what the project design was and addressed in the CEQA document. We also had our environmental consultant, SWCA, peer review the BRR and prepare the CEQA document. In that document, there are no significant and unavoidable impacts. All the potential impacts have been avoided through project design or through proposed mitigation measures. So we prepared a mitigated negative declaration is what it's called. We submitted that to the state clearinghouse as we're required to under current law. They distributed to a variety of state agencies, and they have 30 days to comment. Of all those agencies, we only received comments from Caltrans and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I would note there are some specific requirements when agencies provide comments. They're supposed to be limited to their area, permitting authority or resource protection. They're supposed to be based on substantial evidence. They're supposed to be specific. They're supposed to provide performance standards, specific mitigation measures. And I would note that neither one of these comment letters does that. But also under state law, the lead agency, which is the city, is required to respond in writing to those agencies who provided comments. So the city has done that. That's attachment 4 of the original Planning Commission report from March 22nd. And we note in there that a lot of their comments were based partly on a misunderstanding of the project. And there's no intention here to pick on any particular agency or their staff. This is very common. And it's a function of, I think, agency staffing. Everybody's understaffed. For the most part, they haven't actually been to the site. They don't have time for that. They're under a time deadline to prepare some comments. And so oftentimes you get these comments that are sort of misguided. And unfortunately, because we didn't have this early consultation to make sure everybody understood the project, we're now required to respond to those comments. And it's, we don't want to be mean about it or anything, but if they're stating things that are not correct, not supported by substantial evidence, we have to clean up that record. And that's what we've done. A couple of examples, Caltrans was concerned that the project would cause stormwater runoff onto Highway 92. We note that the site plan has elevation contours on it, and the site's about 10 feet below the highway. It's not going to, the water's not going that way. On the California Department of Fish and Wildlife comments, again, they comment that we're going to lose 4 acres of upland habitat through development of this project. But as we note in the report, the 4 acres they're referring to is where the existing corporation yard. It's not upland habitat for these species of concern. They note that the proposed fencing, which is there to protect California red-legged frogs and San Francisco garter snakes, could pose a hazard to wildlife because they could get entangled in it, or it could create a barrier to dispersal, that sort of thing. And we have a very detailed rebuttal to that in our report, and I recommend everybody read it, that this is, they're referring to types of fencing that we're not using. They're referring to hazards that aren't applicable in this case. We have contacted CDF&W by phone and email. We have not really received any substantial response on our response to them. What they have said is that thank you for submitting your response to our comments. We will continue reviewing it. We let them know when this original hearing was, when it was continued. We told them it was continued to this date with instructions for how to access the staff reports and to attend the meeting. And the response was, we won't be attending because it's after work hours. So at this point, we're moving forward with our proposal. In terms of other comments, we've received no comments from the public or the neighbors at this point. We did have a little bit of input at the study session, and we've taken that into account. We did, over the last 24 hours, get a few additional comments and questions from individual planning commissioners. And we did sum those up in a brief memo that went out this afternoon. Most of those questions were clarifying. There was one that was a little more substantial that got into some discussion of relocating this pond to a different location. And I think at some point, our planning director, Jill Akes, probably has a few words to say about that, and our biological consultants. But that's the outline of it. The staff recommendation is to adopt the initial study mitigated negative declaration and then approve the coastal development permit, architectural design review, and the tree permit. As I noted, our biologists are here, can answer questions that come up, and I'll turn it, I don't know if Jill wants to say anything before we turn it back to the Planning Commission, or if we just turn it back to them at this point.
Thanks, Doug. I'm just going to check in with the chair here. So Chair Gorn, we know that there may be some questions about the study that is underway on outside the scope of this project for feasibility of potential future affordable housing to go on the western portion of the site. I can speak to that now, or we can hold until after public comment. It's up to you.
I think that that's an important point, an important part of this. Obviously, it's not what we're deciding on, but I think in terms of background, it's important to mention, if you could.
I can, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see the maps? Okay, great. So back in November, there was a joint session of the Planning Commission with City Council, and we presented about housing. The focus was on housing sites throughout the city with the intent of really firming up the housing sites that are going to go into your Cycle 6 housing element. Several of the sites, not very many because the city doesn't own a lot of properties, but a few sites are owned by the city and were of particular interest to City Council for what their potential might be. Of the three that we presented, Council has us moving forward on one, and we're out with an RFQ right now over at 555 Kelly. And then this one, 880 Stone Pine, Council directed staff to prepare a feasibility study. This particular slide is showing a map from the 2018 draft land use plan where we were making informed assumptions about the constraints of developing the site. And in fact, as a result of some guidance from our project biologist, we did not include this site as a housing site at that time for our 2020 land use plan. However, we did receive input through your study session back in August, as well as from the November work session. That Council would like us to see if it's possible to include housing somewhere else on this site. The site is 22 acres, but obviously a lot of it, as Doug showed in another slide with those buffers, a lot of it is consumed by the conservation easement, the creek buffer, the ag pond and its buffer. And of course, we have the upper portion that is currently and proposed to be continuing to be devoted to the corporation yard. And so what we were tasked to do is look at what was left and whether or not it would be viable for a housing site. The project biologist and CEQA consultant is SWCA for the Courtyard project. They're also working with staff on the feasibility study from the context of hazards and biological resources. And then we are also working with a housing consultant who has been studying those outcomes for the prospect of marketing the site to affordable housing developers and whether or not it could be financed and insured. And due to, in particular, the dam inundation hazard that exists at this time, that's really not looking to be feasible in the near term until the Pilarcitos Dam is repaired. This was addressed in your memo that went out this afternoon. But I do want to bring it up because there were questions that came through a commissioner from, I believe, a member of the public who was concerned about whether or not the courtyard and its design, including the access roadway, would counteract our ability to have a housing site if it would impinge on it. And I'm here to say that the courtyard being up here on this eastern portion with an access road, regardless of the format of the conservation corridor buffer and its fencing, maintains a potential, what we call the theoretical parcel 2, that's on the order of 3.5 acres. And that's pretty big. And if we're looking at a density typical of downtown of 25 to 40 units to the acre, it could support quite a few units at a future time. And we just want you to know that that is still being studied. We haven't finished those studies. We are going to conclude them and present them to City Council for their direction. It would have been speculative to include a study of a housing site in your CEQA document, since we have such a long way to go before really defining what might be most appropriate for development on the western side of this property. In fact, you saw staff present some other uses last August, and so there's a number of things that have been considered here. So we just wanted to address this because it came up through your communications to us over the last couple of days, and we know people are really interested in it. I haven't addressed potentially moving the pond and discussing that. This is also something that our consultants have studied and prepared information to the city about what that would entail. And it's very difficult to do. It could make this one of the most expensive affordable housing sites I've ever seen, and it's not necessarily recommended by our consultants here. And if anybody wants to bring this up later, they can speak to it in a more technical way than I can. But we did study all of the things that have been brought forward in the comment letters and the comment emails that we saw today. And just wanted to reassure you that your thinking and action on a courtyard project would not rule out a future housing site on this property. It's other things that are challenging to whether or not housing could be developed on this property.
Thank you, Jill. Again, that's not, so just to be clear, that's not what we're considering today. We are considering the courtyard, and I wonder if you could just quickly explain before we get to public comment why we need to consider that west side at all, since what we're doing is, what you want to do is redevelop the courtyard. Explain why we also need to deal with the pond and the corridor, just so everyone understands. Can you do that?
Well, I think that the primary thing you do need to deal with the corridor. The corridor is relevant to the courtyard development. And I think our biologists can speak to this more, but the concern is that you have site access to the courtyard now that crosses over potential traversing of the site between the creek and the pond. I'm going to go ahead and stop with that, though, and let Dr. Jennings and SWCA's biologist speak to you about that, but that is part of your courtyard project.
So obviously we have a lot of questions and discussions to get to. I would like to open public comment first so that we can get that, get everyone who wants to speak to give them a chance to speak, because I think this is going to take a while. Jill, do we have anyone? Oh, so anyone in attendance who wants to speak, you need to raise your hand, your virtual hand on the screen, and we'll take public comment now so that we can deliberate all at once.
Okay, so first person we have is Mike Ferreira, and I'm going to go ahead and time it. My timer timed out, so I will keep time. One moment, let me let him in.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, you should be able to unmute now. There you are. There you
Thank
go.
you, Commissioner Gorn and commissioners and staff. And I think Chair Gorn had a very good question, because we've just discussed, or had it discussed, that we've been there for 18 years and we're making such small change that it almost didn't need CEQA. And so that to me would indicate that maybe we should be able to just focus on the site, it's the courtyard site itself. And actually one of the things that's being done in the west side is rerouting the current road that has, I guess, been satisfactory for 18 years. And in the rerouting, which I've seen drawn in various ways, typically cuts off a piece of the flat ground that used to be used for pot horticulture and has no habitat value that we ever found before. And so in losing that right angle of the northern road, i.e. when you enter, you make a right angle turn to the left, and then you make a right angle turn to the right. And instead of the somewhat of a shortcut for the new road, we would be cutting off property that could be viable for whatever the city wants to do, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's parkland or gardens or whatever. You know, we do things in geometric fashion. We don't build on the curve. And so we could retain a good square parcel for future evaluation. Currently, in this plan as is before you, due to that curve and the way it causes your blue line to be drawn, a considerable amount of non-habitat but potential useful property gets put into a cul-de-sac that we would then be calling upland habitat, that really would be more of an attractive nuisance to the animals, because they would have a difficult time trying to find the corridor, so to speak. So I think it's a better thing to keep the existing road alignment and not have to deal with the western part, in interest of conserving city property for future uses. And as to the moving of the ponds, hey, it looked really good in 2007 from the same consultants, but if they've changed their mind, okay, that's what it is. I'll just let my comments go with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bridget?
I have no others, Commissioner or Chair.
That's the only comment? Is there anybody else out there who wants to speak to this issue? Okay. So we'll close public comment. And we will start our deliberations, which includes clarifying questions, but you can ask whatever questions you would like.
Chair John here. Would you like, since that question was posed by the public, would you like a response now, or how would you like to approach the response?
No, we'll get to it.
Thank you.
We'll get to it. Thank you. Commissioner Benjamin.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to ask a couple of questions, for that helpful staff report, and for the comments that we received over this period. I wanted to begin by asking when you would like to understand Dr. Jennings and Jessica's assessment of the pros and cons of the riparian corridor and the concerns that have been raised. I think that's material to our thinking. At least it's material to my thinking. I'd like to learn more about the, if we do keep the corridor in that more restricted configuration as a result of the feedback we get, I'd like to learn more about the buffers on the wetland, which were interesting to me. I know that 100 feet is the minimum, but I noticed that the buffer kind of ended mid-slope, and I wanted to learn, I'm not saying it's the wrong buffer, but I would like to understand why we chose that a little better. So maybe I should start with that, Chair.
Well, I guess, yeah, I was sort of hoping that we would sort of raise what the main issues might be, and then have the
okay.
Dr. Mark Jennings sort of address both globally and specifically what he sees there, because otherwise it's sort of open-ended.
Right. Okay. So let me try to phrase my question. I think it's premature to call it a concern. You know, this is me speaking with a healthy respect for the many things that I don't know. You know, we have a couple of species, frogs and snakes, that are related. We had this comment from Fish and Wildlife that I relayed in the ex parte communication about the potential impacts of snake predation at the underpass under the roadway. There was a section in the staff report that was referring to that upland habitat as dispersal habitat, and I agree it doesn't have much value as dispersal habitat, but it may have value as foraging habitat. Mr. Ferreira mentioned the possibility that the additional habitat was an attractive nuisance. Could well be. I have no idea. I'm interested in hearing how that works. But I guess my model is to try to understand whether, and there was also the road question, which is that we have, in this design, we're replacing 2 parallel roads by 1 road. And the report suggests that we're getting less mortality through that process. And I certainly agree that having a frog go under the road is better than having a frog getting hit on the road. No question about that. I'm not sure whether simply consolidating it to 1 road itself gave us that benefit, but it certainly would reduce the cost as opposed to having two underpasses. And it's probably a better use of the space. But I think those are sort of the, and maybe one other question was, are there opportunities to spruce up, you know, whether we go with a small habitat, whether we go with the original design of habitat, or we expand it by adding that extra section, that lobe that was sort of parallel to the road. Are there ways that we might consider that would spruce up the habitat to make it more productive so that even if there's a little bit less because we're setting aside land that we might want to use for some other purpose later. And that's the land I regard as potentially available as opposed to the existing area that the courtyard is using, because I don't think that area is particularly available. Is there something that we can do that would make the area that is available really productive? You know, that we improve the biologic productivity of that area. So those are my questions with respect to this. I don't know, maybe other commissioners want to hear other things from Dr. Jennings, but that's what's on my mind. Thank you.
I think it is a good idea to sort of frame the questions for Dr. Jennings first, and then we can move on to all the other questions, because this obviously is one of the big sticking points. So if other commissioners have sort of questions to raise about the biological concerns, can you raise your hand? Okay. Vice Chair Hernandez.
So my understanding, and just trying to ask for clarification here from Dr. Jennings, is that if a housing development or a trail come in the future, there would be a separate review process for those projects. They're not included in this. That's point number one. And then point number two, I wanted to understand what the thinking was in terms of where would a trail go? Would it go in that easement area that's been defined, or is it in a location TBD at a future point in time? And the reason I'm asking is I'm just wondering about the impact on, is this something that's even going to be feasible to even put a trail in at some future date? So those are the two questions that I have.
Other commissioners? Reddick. Okay. Good. Commissioner Reddick.
Well, just to echo what Vice Chair Hernandez just said, I had that same question about the trail location in my mind. And at the public hearing, there was discussion about the trail necessitating public parking nearby. So I'm also curious if, maybe the whole thing is TBD and no light can be shed on it, but I'm also curious if there is thinking about parking, how that would work.
Okay. I also did have just a question about the impact of having a road over a wildlife corridor and the pollution and chemicals and plastic and rubber that is left by all those vehicles, and possible chemical spills as well from the stuff they're carrying. I'm concerned about that also washing into this culvert and basically destroying what we're trying to protect. And so I wanted to make sure that issue was also addressed. And if Commissioner Gossett, welcome, by the way. I never said welcome. Maybe we can turn it over to Dr. Jennings.
Well, I do have a couple questions. Well, I would like to echo the questions the other commissioners asked. And then I wanted to know, this is called the wildlife corridor. Is it exclusionary, or that's the question I have, in addition to what everyone else asked. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Mark Jennings, if you're there, do we need to, from a process point of view, do I need to open or close anything? Or can we just invite Dr. Jennings to talk about this, since he's a consultant for staff?
The chair, since this is the city's consultant, I think it's fine to just invite him, as you would allow staff to answer questions.
Thank you. That's fine. So is Dr. Jennings there?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe he can address, first of all, the fish and wildlife concerns, but also what describe the corridor and why it's important and what is some of the commissioners' concerns about it.
Hi, this is Mark Jennings here. Thank you for the opportunity to answer questions.
Hi there.
With regards to the project itself, the main baseline take-home message is you wanted to design something that would not cause harm to the animals that are present there, specifically the frogs and snakes. And so therefore, the planning for this in terms of our design was to design a system that would prevent any potential harm to the species. In other words, what we were after was avoidance. And so the best way to go about that was to design a tunnel to prevent any mortality of snakes or frogs on the roadway. The tunnel was designed to give minimal specifications so that if you designed as proposed, it would give you the best chance for no harm to the animals. I reviewed a lot of designs that have been successfully used for salamanders, frogs, toads, snakes. Many of them have open slats on the surface. I thought that would not be good. And that's in regards to things like tar and asphalt and other things falling into the tunnel. So that's why I did not include a slatted culvert as a tunnel. So the design that's present is one that's most effective for what you want to do, and it's most effective for protecting the animals that would cross under it. Now, it was designed for snakes and frogs, but the fencing that's put up allows for passage of other animals, things like deer, raccoons. Other animals will be able to pass up this corridor that are large by going over the fence. Other small animals will be able to utilize the tunnel and crawl through them. Does that cover at least part of the questions that were asked?
It covers some. We had, I don't know, were you listening earlier?
The trail, I'm going to punt. I'm going to punt that question on the trail because I discussed that with Jessie pretty extensively, and she's much more knowledgeable about the trail than I am.
Okay. Then there is the exclusionary aspect, and really addressing that fish and wildlife concern, I think, is the main.
Yeah, the exclusionary. What you tried to do was protect the pond area and have connection to Pelicitos Creek. And so when the original design was proposed of 50 feet, that was the minimum that was proposed, that was presumed to provide safe movement corridor between the animals, between the creek and the pond. Since then, the modified design has allowed for more area. So that is to a benefit of the animals, the snakes and the frogs. If it's decided that you want to have that increased area. So I consider that a benefit to the animals. And I believe that the department, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, would be agreeable to an increased area that's set aside. As for the worry about the tunnel itself being a place for snakes to sit and pick off frogs and other animals as they come by, the area that we're talking about doesn't have very many frogs. And because of that, I suspect that the number of garter snakes there is exceedingly small, at least San Francisco garter snakes. And so the potential of having a snake sit there for a long period of time waiting for a food object, I don't think is very logical. If there were lots of frogs, that might be true. But, you know, in nature, any place that has a spot that's narrowed, you know, for instance, like on a canal, we've got water flowing and spilling into a pool below, and all the fish get stopped there. Well, the predators always come to those spots because they know they can pick stuff off. And if there isn't any food there, they're going to leave. And I suspect at this wildlife bridge, because there's so few frogs present in the system, snake's going to sit there for a while, but it's not going to stay very long because there's just not enough food to keep it present. And so I don't think that's a big issue for this particular project.
Commissioner Benjamin.
I'm unmuted here. So, Dr. Jennings, I just wanted to touch on the question of, I appreciated your comment about the area. One of the members of the public asked about whether we were creating an attractive nuisance. And I also asked about whether there were things in the areas that we were setting aside for the creatures, whatever its size, that we should or should not do to make it a more biologically productive area for them.
The attractive nuisance, any open area that a person sets aside has the potential to become a magnet for people to use for whatever reason. If it's open space, you know, some people think that it belongs to them. In this case, we're setting aside open space that is available for these animals to continue living in perpetuity. And that's the goal of avoidance here, is that we're trying to make this location, you know, suitable by not doing anything bad to it so the animals can continue to survive. And I believe we've done that. With regards to, you know, this idea that, you know, that we could increase the habitat, make it better for the animals. That's not the goal of this particular exercise. You know, we were supposed to design something that avoids any potential take. And so when you get into discussing items about making it better for the animals, more suitable for the animals, that's a whole nother issue that's not covered by this. And to me, that would be more appropriate if you were talking about this with staff from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, if they were requiring that for your permit process. And that hasn't been an issue here. So that's why I think it's not suitable at this time to include any discussions of improving the quality of the habitat.
So you're referring to the removing of the fences and opening up that area to be a little bit larger.
I was thinking of things like planting various vegetation. In other words, making what looks like it's pretty open habitat to provide cover for the animals, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Enhancing.
So just to follow on, if I understood you right, Dr. Jennings, you're saying that the Department of Fish and Wildlife would look favorably on the larger area that's on the diagram, but it's out of scope to improve the quality of that area because this is an avoidance objective rather than an improvement objective, at least as the project is framed right now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that answered my questions.
Dr. Jennings, I think we probably we want to come back to you. I'm sure there will be other things that come up, but maybe we can get Jessica to answer the trails question since that seems to be a topic of concern.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you all for having me this evening. It's nice to meet you all. So Commissioner Benjamin, I know, are you talking about the selection of the 100-foot buffer around the wetland, or are you referring to the post-trail easement? What was your question specifically on that?
Okay, so Commissioner Gorns brought you in to talk about the trail easement, but as long as we've got you here, I did have a question about the buffer around the abandoned ag pond, because as the picture shows, the contour lines are still pretty squeezed together. When you're 100 feet down, you're still not in flat areas. So I know 100 feet is, kind of convenient because that's the minimum. And if we go with a larger area, it may be moot anyway, because we'd be limiting uses because of the value to the special status species. But I'm interested in whether there's some aspect of the way that ag pond operates that make the 100 feet at that particular point better than a larger buffer, or a smaller buffer would have been okay, but for the 100-foot minimum specified in our code.
So the 100-foot buffer that is surrounding the agricultural pond that comes from the City of Half Moon Bay zoning code, which defines a wetland buffer zone as 100 feet measured from the high water point. So that means on the pond that was there, 100 feet was selected in accordance with the zoning code, just so that that's clear. So even though there are contour lines, or maybe, like in the field, it might look like that's on a slope, the reason for that is to be in compliance with the zoning code. That was why that was selected.
If we didn't have that in our code, would a smaller buffer achieve the wetland protection that we would have wanted? Or would we have wanted 100 feet because that's the right amount for this wetland? Because as I understand it, the 100 foot is a minimum. It's not written in stone.
I think that's a good question. Right now, the way that the entire project is set up, you're right up against Highway 92. So I think you probably wouldn't want it to be any smaller. I think 100 feet is a good minimum there. The way that the zoning code is written, a 50-foot riparian buffer could be around the edge of vegetation if that is greater than 100 feet away from the water. So you kind of have to choose the most protective measure based on the zoning code as it's written.
Thank you. It's probably moot anyway, but thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other question I think came from Commissioners Hernandez and Ruddock concerning the trail alignment.
Did you hear those questions, Jessica?
I did, yes, I did. So as far as access to that trail and the design of that trail, that wasn't really incorporated into this particular project. That would be for future development. Similarly, for the parking concern that you have, that would be for future development. I think that the wildlife corridor could be adjusted to, accommodate that trail in some way, but I think that's something that would come up at the time of design of that trail.
Yeah.
And then Chair Gorn, you can certainly speak to your question as well as anyone, but I want to be sure that I understood from Dr. Jennings. If I understood your concern correctly, you wanted to know that as the corp-yard vehicles pass over the tunnels, that they don't essentially leave debris that would end up polluting, or maybe it was something different.
No, that's the concern.
Yeah, so I wanted to be sure that didn't fall through the cracks, if you'll pardon the mixture.
I thought he answered that, but
okay, good.
Does Commissioner Ruddock and Hernandez, does that answer your questions about the trails? Okay. So, Commissioner Benjamin, I guess I actually thought he answered that question, but do you have a remaining concern about it?
No, I think I was okay with it. I did have a question about the riparian woodlands versus the wetlands. So it was kind of a delineation question that I was unclear about, but it wasn't at the pond and it wasn't at the tunnels. It was over closer to Pelorcitos Creek. Should I go to there?
Yeah, I think we should. I think that those sort of specific questions have been raised, the sort of the first round of questions. And yeah, I think it's just whatever we want to discuss is now open, I believe.
Okay, so this is probably more my ignorance of the way the wetlands, the description of the wetlands, the analysis that we received was fairly complex. It sliced up the different water resources in a number of different ways. Where's the Army Corps jurisdiction? Where's the CADFW jurisdiction? Where's the Coastal Commission jurisdiction? And I understood that there was an area that we called riparian woodlands that sounded like it might be wet, but it's not wetlands. I remember back in 2011, the Coastal Commission had some guidance that sort of said, well, it could be like wetlands, but if it's in a riparian area, it's not really. And then that was discounted in subsequent dialogues. I remember a memo from Chris Kern in 2015, or maybe it was earlier than that addressed that concern. And so I just want to be clear about whether there are Coastal Commission, that is one parameter of wetlands in the vicinity of Pelorcitos Creek. Can you help me? And whether those are areas that are riparian woodlands but aren't really wetlands by Coastal Commission standards. Did that make sense?
Dr. Jennings, I believe that was directed to you.
Oh boy. I was going to say who was going to jump forward. Everybody has different definitions. That's the problem. And normally, most of the agencies follow the criteria that if it meets Army Corps of Engineers criteria for wetlands, it's a wetland. In other words, the soils, the plants, and the inundation with water, that counts. In other words, it meets a minimum score, and it counts. If that happens in a forest, you still got to meet those minimum criteria to have it count as a wetland. And so when you say these forests could be wetland forests, that doesn't follow the criteria that most other folks follow. And so I wouldn't call it a wetland, even with the forest, unless it meets those criteria.
But the Coastal Commission has a one parameter definition. That's where I'm trying to wrap my head around. They depart from that 3 parameter definition. And I understand what you're saying about, and I'm not trying to call them wetlands because I don't want to create necessarily a 100-foot buffer there. But I want to be sure I understand why they're not. Does that put too sharp a point on it?
For the animals that are involved?
No. For the
I'm saying for the animals, it makes a difference for them. Okay. For the humans who are trying to, slice and dice this stuff up and putting labels on it, that it doesn't make a difference. Okay. For us, I know it makes a difference for the Coastal Commission, but I find it's a slippery slope if you try to say, well, the Coastal Commission says one thing and all the other agencies say something else. I find that difficult to be able to come to a common ground to provide an answer that fulfills everybody's requirements. Because I find you're either one camp or the other.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to put you in that difficult spot. I understand. Question back to staff. There was a discussion about the slats being maintained for the lifetime of the project. And so I thought I ought to just step back and ask what the lifetime of the project means.
That sounds like a Todd question.
Yeah, I got about 15 years left, and after that, I'll turn that over to the next person that takes over my chair. I mean, realistically, if we put these fences up, it's going to be ours to maintain for the life of our inhabitancy here at the property, however long that may be.
Okay, I just wanted to get clarity. Thank you.
No.
Then there was this was kind of a nit, as if the other things I've asked aren't nits. In the mitigation 2, this was on page 38 of the report that came out this weekend. There was, in the Bio 2 mitigation, there was a contingency in subpart H that said, if this contingency occurs, then we're going to follow the procedure in subpart H and subpart I. So I think the intention here is that you want to follow I and J. It was the lettering just changed from one version to the next because something was added in front. And I just want to be sure whenever we get the motion in, and if I misunderstood, I apologize. But the way I read it, it said if H occurs, we do H. And I'm pretty sure that's not what it was in the earlier version. While they're looking at that, I'll just comment that I thought if you're ready for comments, maybe that's premature. Maybe we're still in question mode. So maybe we should hold off.
It's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
We're talking about
I really appreciated the additional insight into the dam inundation issue. Thank you very much for that. It made me feel much better about the completeness of the document. And I certainly understood and appreciated Doug's observation that the way CEQA works, we're talking about the impact of the project on the environment, not the impact of the environment on the project. From my perspective, it's certainly true that if a lot of water comes down and hits that tension fabric tension building, if it forces it to move, it could do some damage down the road. On the other hand, there's probably plenty of other debris in that water that's going to do a lot of damage anyway. So it's probably not a significant impact relative to everything else that's there. But I thought the opportunity to talk about it and have it up front was valuable, and I appreciated it. Did I vamp enough to get to the Bio 2 mitigation? Do you guys see what I was talking about?
I did see that, and Commissioner Benjamin is correct.
Yeah, based on Dr. Jennings' comments, I also like the larger area. I didn't hear him saying that he thought the increased area was an attractive nuisance, and he thought that it would go a long way to address what concerns the Department of Fish and Wildlife might have had. So I appreciate the revision that staff has suggested and acknowledge that they went above and beyond to accommodate our jurisdictional regulatory colleagues here. And I really appreciate it. That's all I have to say.
Todd, while we have you here, there's a question raised about the curve in the road. Like, we're eliminating the southern road, but on the northern road, there is a curve. And just how much that, why that curve is there and how much curve that takes off of, how much that changes the line. Can you answer that, please?
Sure. The primary design for that, and Mark Schatz can come on and comment as well, is we reached out to Coastside Fire, and also just looking at the largest vehicles that I've seen come here through in my time, being a 53-foot tractor trailer. the current configuration isn't easy for those vehicles to navigate. So part of the future work that will be done there and is being entitled is going to be adding a significant amount of fire suppression stuff farther onto the courtyard property. And if a hook and ladder, for heaven forbid, a hook and ladder needs to come out here and they're coming in code 3, navigating that turn is going to be very dicey as it's currently configured. So we figured the worst case scenario and what we need to design that curve for, and just make it as gentle of a slope as possible so that we can safely and efficiently move large equipment in and out of the property.
If I could jump in on this one, I was looking at John Dowdy, thank you, Chair. I was actually looking at Google Earth as we were sitting here, and if one wants to jump on that, I'm not going to pop it up there, but if you look at it, you can see the endless trails and paths of vehicles outside of the gravel dirt trail there. And frankly, kind of like where people make their own trails, you can kind of see where that goes. And so I would say that is not currently actually being where many vehicles are going, simply because the turns, the 90-degree turns, don't work for the larger vehicles. Simply put, this is one of the few areas that we have for city projects and some utility projects as well for laydown area. So it's not that the equipment that we have necessarily can't make those turns, but there are times in which we have deliveries of large pieces of equipment or large pieces like light poles, things of that nature that come on larger trailers. And so those are reasons why it may not be just as simple as cutting that down and making and keeping the 90 degrees. And what I, again, can tell you is just simple look at Google Earth and you can see the trails and paths that are not following the dirt path. Do I think that we could possibly, pull back a little bit and look at that? Certainly, we're open to doing that. And our interest is to try to keep as much property available for future use on those other areas. But I think we also mentioned in response to the question, and just a reminder that when and if a project comes along, the most likely scenario is that will have to be a private or a public street that accesses that facility. We will have to remove the driveway anyway, and we will recycle the materials as we do for all of our projects. And so it won't go to waste in terms of recycled and landfill issues. And we will come in and modify the driveway accordingly and connect in with that project. And again, we're talking about a project that might come, might not come. Okay. So those are kind of the issues. So what I can say is that we're open and willing to look at some tightening down maybe of that a little bit, but to some extent we cannot completely keep the path of travel where it is today because it will not be used on those turns by the equipment and materials that come into that site.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dowdy. Mark Schatz, you had your hand up briefly, and maybe you're the one to add something to that about the amount of sort of the amount of space that is lost by having that curve and why that curve matters.
I took my hand down because I thought Todd did such a beautiful job of answering. We have to meet certain minimum radii for the fire trucks. And when we did it, we tried to make that road as easy to traverse for the large vehicles as we could. It's a tiny piece of land that's gone. And as John says, when the new housing development gets proposed, we're going to have, whoever designs it is going to have to figure out how best to access that property. And the road will likely get reconfigured somewhat at that point. When we did our original design, which you saw at the earlier meeting, we had a little parking lot that was proposed there, but that's gone now, right? As the site's no longer going to be a community garden.
Right.
So, but the easing of the road was, as Todd and John have both said, to make it easier to traverse for large vehicles. which we know will be entering the site.
And Maz, is that your hand up?
Chair, yeah, I just wanted to echo some of those comments and just mention that, and just reaffirm that, you know, the section for the street we're looking at is going to be just sufficient for what we're operating out here. So we're not talking about building a super deep or expensive section of asphalt or anything like that. We're talking about utilizing a lot of Class 2 aggregate materials and some minimal asphalt. And as John mentioned, you know, it's pretty common for these types of access roads that do get beat up with a lot of heavy equipment and truck. They're going to require maintenance long-term. And so it's pretty common to grind those and recycle the materials and repurpose it. So again, it's we would be configuring the road in such a manner that it could be easily modified and relocated and reuse that material for other uses. And it's just hard to design it for a future need without knowing kind of what that looks like. So that was kind of the thought process behind the configuration, this section of the road itself. And as far as the configuration goes, yes, that's the straighter the better, because a lot of those equipment and the flatbed trucks, they do run off the edge of the road in its current configuration. And I think that's more damaging to the habitat. So we would like to keep that in the paved section as much as possible.
So that road could be changed back to, if the future plan needed that space, it could be changed back. Is that right, Jill? Is that what you're saying?
The chair, I've raised my hand because I wanted staff to actually answer the question that was on the table. So I measured it, and that corner is on the order of 1/3 of an acre, possibly up to a half. I think you've heard from the director and our city engineer that there's some flexibility associated with it. But the city attorney and I want to remind everybody that what I already presented to you about potential future uses of the western side of the property, including possibly affordable housing, is speculative and not precluded from the project that's before you. And in fact, there was still, even with the road realignment, potentially a 3.5 or so acre piece of property left that was not impacted by the roadway realignment. So I just want to put all that food for thought there, and just the bottom line of how much it is, order of magnitude relative to the remaining potentially or not potentially developable piece is small and not precluding future options.
So 1/3 of an acre is what we're talking
about. Yep, that was rough and quick, but
thank you. So I do have one other question, but it's kind of off topic. So let's go with Commissioner Reddick.
Thank you. I want to add my thanks and praise to staff for the additional light that's been shed on the whole question of the dam inundation risk, as Commissioner Benjamin mentioned a few minutes ago. I remember at our public hearing last August that perhaps there was some reaction that about the question of the dam, a reaction as if the city were proposing to build a new infrastructure in this place for the first time. And as Doug, I believe, and articulately in the staff report currently talks about the fact that there are baseline activities there, and all CEQA really is concerned about is the deviations from that baseline. And as we learned, that there are aspects of this project that would make the courtyard probably significantly less vulnerable to dam inundation. So I get that, and I appreciate that. I had one sort of clarifying question for you, Doug. I noticed that the solar farm has been reduced considerably in size from what the plans we looked at last August. Is that primarily a budget decision, or is it in order to maximize the amount of space in the western part of the property, as we've just been discussing, which is towards some potential other development?
Perhaps I jump in on that one, Doug, if you're okay with it. If I think John Dowdy for the record. Again, when we were here previously with the study session, you'll recall that there was an area of solar farm, and there was a area for potentially solar farm and potentially the community garden. Those were ideas that had come out and kind of out there and dealing with it. We had always proposed to have solar on the site itself, separate from the solar farm. What you're seeing today is the solar field for the courtyard only. So just to be clear, we're not looking to farm out. There's just not enough land and area really to make that worthwhile in that site. So what you're seeing is roughly the outline of what we believe is necessary to meet the needs now and moving forward with the development of the property for self-sufficiency on our site and our site alone.
So thanks, John. I'm sure that's the right thing to do. I was mildly disappointed to see us have to give up the idea of the bigger solar farm, but I understand the considerations that go into the best practices in managing that property for the future. That's all I have. Thanks.
Doug, can I ask you one question that's that I just don't understand? I mean, I guess if we had clarifying questions, we would have asked. But in this report, it says, I understand about the taking away of the trees and the 12 trees that might go along the road. But in the report, it says that there's not only the 33 trees, of which 12 would go along the road, but there's an additional 30. And so really we're talking about 63 trees that we're considering planting. And I'm not sure where those would go. And I don't understand where 51 trees could possibly go. So if you could just clarify where that is and what that means.
Sure. I think one thing is we're talking about a little bit of apples and oranges here, not specifically apple or orange trees, but more metaphorical. So we have trees that PG&E has paid for, and those the intent in their permit, which it was a couple of years ago, so it was before you were on the Planning Commission, but it was not a mitigation measure under SEEK. It was a condition of approval, and it was essentially to make up for removing some of the trees out on Highway 92 to improve the aesthetic of the courtyard. And so I think, sort of arbitrarily picked a 3-to-1 replacement ratio. So the trees that were located along 880 Stone Pine, there were 11 trees. So they have funded 33 24-inch box-sized trees. But at the time, we didn't have a plan for 880 Stone Pine. We knew we were preparing one. And so it was left up to the city's discretion to pick the species of tree and the planting location, and that the focus was going to be on aesthetics, not specifically to create some kind of enhanced biological habitat. And so we do have, out of 33 trees, right now there are 12 trees on the landscaping plan. So we could put, quite a few more trees, another 20 trees or so on this site. And no, we have not picked a specific location. I would recommend we would put maybe a few to kind of soften things up in that opening that you can see from Highway 92 down to the courtyard. And some of this, it might make sense. Again, it'd be kind of nice to have them along the access road, but we don't know how long that access road will be there. So I think we'll plan as many as we can right now, but we may want to sort of, not that, I don't want the money to go into a black hole, but until some of these other items settle out, I mean, they could get included in a housing project or a community garden, but we can't really plan them now if we don't know that they're going to stay there. The other part of this is because of the court project, we are removing the 3 heritage trees, which are native trees in this case, arroyo willows. And I think these may have been different ones than what Commissioner Benjamin was discussing, but it was gone to in great detail in the preliminary wetlands delineation to establish that they were not Coastal Commission single parameter wetlands. They were isolated upland examples that were not associated with wetlands or riparian areas, that they were likely got established when it was an agricultural operation and there was irrigation going on and their roots are just deep enough now. But because they're native trees, we have 2 choices. One is if they're heritage trees, we replace them 1-to-1. If it's a native tree, our land use plan says you replace them 10-to-1. So we conservatively took the higher number, the 10-to-1, and we said the city would replace 30 of them instead of 3. Now, those are going to be a little bit different because they're willows, and frankly, it might make more sense to plant those down closer to the creek where, I don't know if you recall in that slide I had that showed the riparian area along the creek, and then our unpaved access road essentially stopping that vegetation. Once that is out of there, that might be a place where we could start putting in some willow trees. I think we need to work that out with our consultants as to what the best place is to do that. But they're 2 different kinds of trees and they'll go in different places is my best answer.
So they're not in the plan. They're more of an inventory as potential for later. You're not planning to put in 63 trees anywhere.
Well, I think we are planning to put them in. I just don't know exactly where we're putting them in today.
That's a lot of trees.
Yep.
Okay.
Because like I said, if PG&E is paid for these trees, if we don't plant them, theoretically we have to give some of that money back. It would be good to, plant as many as we can here.
I get you. I understand.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Just pinging on that point that Doug made. Is there a drop dead date for spending for locating those trees, or can we do it once we have clarity on what the best spots are?
It's not. The condition of approval left that up to the city. I think there is a general principle that when government takes money, it can't just disappear. You do have to account for it and spend it at some point.
Let me just say, typically, you under statute, you've got 10 years to use to spend that money. That's kind of the.
This is John Dowdy again.
10 years is the typical standard for basically using the funds, whether on a reimbursement agreement or whatever with that deal. 10 years is the standard that's typical in most statutory stuff for the state.
So we're a couple years in, and we have quite a few more.
We have ample time to figure out where to put those trees, in my opinion.
John, you may need to identify who you are.
Sorry, John Dowdy, Public Chair.
Okay. And so I don't really see anybody else's hand up, but the one thing we haven't discussed is the two different versions, the one that is the original wildlife corridor and the one that is sort of an expanded wildlife corridor. Does anyone have something they want to talk about those? Commissioner Benjamin?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't speak clearly to that earlier, but I took Dr. Jennings' comments that Fish and Wildlife would look very favorably on the expanded area, that he did not consider it an attractive nuisance. So I would support the green line in the fenced area.
Thank you. So if the commissioners are done deliberating, which it sounds like we are done deliberating, are we looking at a motion?
I'm looking at a motion.
Through the chair, I did see John Dowdy and Doug Garrison waving hands, so I don't know if there's another staff point to be made.
Doug, what do you got?
Mine is just a clarification on Commissioner Benjamin's comment when he said the green line is the original narrower one.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's no opportunity to confuse that I cannot exacerbate. And I'm not colorblind. I guess it's kind of a purple color. The one that runs parallel, I've got a map here. So I like this line.
Yep. Okay.
Is that a good enough record for what I have in mind?
That's an attachment to the supplemental staff report. I think you could just say, as shown on the attachment number, I forget if it's 2 or 3, but it's an attachment.
Yeah, I don't have a number on my printout, but so yes, and thank you very much for catching my error before I went off half-cocked into the record. And I yield to Public Works Director Dowdy if he had more.
Yeah, John Dowdy?
Only John Dowdy again for the right. Only one, to clarify the color, and two, to say that that we're amenable to that adjustment. And thank you for your consideration tonight.
In that case, I would just like to finish by saying I don't like doing ex parte conversations in general, but I knew this was on a short fuse for budget. And to anybody who had to do extra push-ups because of bad dialogue, I apologize and thank them. Looking at you, Doug. And with that, I'd like to move that we adopt the resolution, adopt the IS M&D and approve the coastal development permit, architectural design review, and tree permit with the version that was in the staff report dated March 29, which included the additional finding on page 7 with respect to dam inundation. It's already in there. And modifying condition bio 2 section H to refer to I and J rather than H and I as it does at the moment.
Through the chair.
Commissioner Reddick, you have your hand up?
To second Commissioner Benjamin's motion.
And Vice Chair Hernandez.
I just had before we take a vote, I just want to make sure that we've actually opened and closed planning commissioner deliberations and everybody's had a chance to make a comment because I don't think we had discussion with city staff, but I'm not sure everybody's had a chance to comment. So I just want to make sure there are no other points to be made amongst our commissioners here.
Well, do you have a point to be made? Would you like to comment?
Well, so I was going to ask the question about widening the corridor, which Commissioner Benjamin's brought up, and the city says they're amenable to it. So I have no issues with that. So we do have a new person on the commission. I want to make sure they've got a chance to speak up if they're so inclined.
Of course. And did you want to talk about the project overall?
I'm supportive of the project. I think this is, it's, you know, I understand that we're not, any future development that we've discussed is out of bounds for this project. So there's no trail, there's no housing here as part of this proposal. Any future work will have to take that into account at a later date. So we're not doing any serial development with this project. So I'm very comfortable with this. It seems like it's an important project, and it'll ameliorate the conditions on the site today by, you know, reducing risk and helping with inundation, as other members have said. So very supportive of it.
And just to make sure, Commissioner Gossett, do you have anything you want to add to the discussion about this?
I just want to say thank you to staff and Doug and Todd, who helped me really understand a lot about the project. And I do agree, there's a baseline here, and it's already been used, you know, as you said, for 18 years, and you're improving the site and really not developing new land and looking for ways to protect some of the sensitive species. So I just want to say thank you for all your time and support. Thank you.
Well, and I would also just quickly point out that it's telling that we didn't have one question about the courtyard itself. And you guys put a lot of effort and energy into redesigning that courtyard into something that is really functional, looks toward the future, and watches those sight lines. And I think that's just great. So we have a motion and a second. If there's anybody else who wants to comment before we vote. Okay.
All right.
We need a roll call.
All right. Commissioner Reddick?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Gossett?
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hernandez?
Yes.
And Chair Gorn?
Yes, please.
Motion approved 5-0.
Great.
Thank you. For the record.
Yeah, it looks, it's a project that I think everybody wants. So, which I guess brings us to, does that bring us to director's report? Going to director's report now. Hold on, I have to look at my agenda.
I think you're right on. Yeah.
Okay, all right, good.
Thank you.
Jill, we have director's report.
We have a brief report. Staff appreciates all the work the commission did on this item and for having come to an extra meeting in March. Thank you very much for all of that. Your agenda forecast for April 12th is Measure D. It's ready for you. You're also going to be seeing 909 Grandview. This is a single family home that had come to the commission previously several months ago and was continued to a date uncertain. It has been renoticed. We've resolved some of the concerns that came about. Scott Phillips is the project planner. He will reach out to you, Commissioner Gossett, to give you background on it so that you'll be caught up with everyone else. You can look at the previous meeting and staff reports and the like. And we'll, I told him not to, he wanted to give that to you now. And I said, no, I think we got to get through the courtyard first. So Scott will reach out to you and you're going to start to meet staff through this process. On April 26th, we are wrapping up the Downtown Parklet and Sidewalk Cafe program. I think it will be ready for your coastal development permit hearing. This is another one where you've had a study session on the item. The Architectural Advisory Committee did as well. And we've made quite a few changes based on your input, and while at the same time trying to follow your input to keep it simple. So thank you for that as well. Architectural Advisory Committee, I don't have a firm agenda for their next meeting. Maybe Bridget does. She's nodding a little bit. No, I think we're still working through that. City Council, April 5th, you're going to see that I'm bringing a contract forward for an environmental consulting firm who's going to do the CEQA document for the housing element. On April 19th for City Council, we are going out with a public hearing notice for the ADU ordinance, believe it or not. The accessory dwelling unit ordinance was reviewed by Planning Commission quite some time ago, and then had a bit of a protracted review by City Council. It was interrupted a bit by COVID. Council ended up adopting the ordinance last August. It was submitted to the Coastal Commission and HCD. The Coastal Commission certified the ADU ordinance with some minor modifications in February. That means that the city needs to readopt it to conform to the Coastal Commission's modifications, and that is what we're bringing forward. They were minor enough. We don't. I don't feel we need to bring it back to you. We are going to, of course, have a fully noticed public hearing. Should the council move it forward, there'll be a second reading, and then guess what we get to do? We get to submit it again back to the Coastal Commission, which should be very straightforward at that point, but also back again to the Department of Housing and Community Development, the other state agency who has oversight review of accessory dwelling unit ordinances, and they will review the ordinance for conformance with state ADU law. So I'm expecting there to be job security and ADU ordinances in the coastal zone because I think they're going to get ping-ponged a bit back and forth. But we'll keep you posted on it. Your staff is using the ADU ordinance as it was adopted by council with the very minor modifications from the Coastal Commission. It's the best we can do to implement law right now, the state law for accessory dwelling unit permitting. And that is really all I have for now. Bridget, did you have anything else for the commission? I know you're looking for a nice version of that guidebook. I don't know why that's so hard to get. We'll see what we can do.
I looked on the website. I looked all over. I'm having trouble, so I sent in a request. So I'm waiting.
Very weird. Yeah,
it is.
I will note the 21 Elements group that we work with on our housing elements and other coordination that we like to do with our other cities in San Mateo County is preparing some new Planning Commission training. And it's just getting going, and they offered a few sessions several years ago. They were held in this City of San Mateo main library, and we'll see what comes up from that. I'm looking forward to being able to forward that over to you. They tend to be locally relevant and have folks who can answer a lot of questions, even if the topic isn't exactly what you're looking for. They have a lot of depth, and will spend all the time that you might want them to dig into local planning issues. So we're still looking for that kind of training, and anything that you see out there, just send it over to Bridget and me. I do want to note that we have a bittersweet parting this week. Tara Hatcher has taken another position outside the organization, and her last day with us is tomorrow. So don't send Tara anything anymore. Just send it to Bridget and me. I know Tara very much enjoyed working with all of you and meeting you all, and we're really happy for her. She got a great opportunity, and it's all we can do is just cheer her on and thank her for her work. Thank you.
She's terrific.
I know.
I'm gonna miss her.
Yeah.
Miss her.
Yep.
So is she going away? Is she leaving Half Moon Bay?
No, but she's going to the private sector. She's got a whole new lease on life. Yeah.
Terrific. So this brings us to Planning Commissioner announcements. Commissioner Reddick has one.
Yes, I just want to add my welcome to Commissioner Gossett. I'm very happy knowing a little bit about your background from Councilmember Brownstone's nomination of you at City Council meeting. Sounds like you have a terrific skill set that will very much benefit this body, and I appreciate you having the spirit to step forward and volunteer, and I look forward to working with you.
And
thank you.
Commissioner Gossett, you are muted. Just so you know. And Commissioner Benjamin has his hand raised.
And I am not muted. So just a reminder, I do think that there's a possibility that I'll be out of town, but so I wanted to be on Bridget's radar, but unfortunately, I don't know when yet. I'm going to try hard to be in town. And as I understand it, from the questions that Winter answered for the commission at the last meeting, I could be out of town and still participate remotely, even if Vice Chair Hernandez is doing the same thing. So I'm not overly concerned as long as I can get bandwidth. And thank you for chasing the question about the Planning Commissioner's Handbook. That was a great document when it was in print, and it would be great to have an updated version. I think I still have mine. As long as we're on the subject of ex-employees, I wanted to mention that today I exchanged email with Brittany Cozzolino. I got around to reading her capstone project for her master's degree, and it is a really nice piece of work. If you're interested in planning, I commend it to you. And since we're all on the Planning Commission, it's something to enjoy. So thank you.
Well, and Commissioner Gossett, I actually didn't get a chance. I wasn't at the last meeting to welcome you here, but I am delighted that you are. So your hand is raised.
Okay, and I just wanted to say thank you for the warm welcome, and I look forward to learning more, and I'm so impressed with the commission and with staff, and I look forward to contributing at some point in the future.
Very happy to have you here. Thank you.
And through the chair, thank you. I am a bit remiss before the motion on the item that was on the agenda. I should say I appreciate Dr. Jennings' input. He has elevated the level of communication and understanding in the city of Half Moon Bay with respect to species, and we are extraordinarily fortunate to have his involvement.
Yeah, it was very helpful to have him here. So thank you. Is everyone done? We can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Steve.
Commissioner Reddick.
I move we adjourn.
And Jimmy, I'm sorry, Commissioner Benjamin seconds. Okay, so Commissioner Reddick?
Yes.
Commissioner Gossett?
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hernandez?
Aye.
And Chair Gorn?
Yes, please. Very good work tonight. That's great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you all. Good night.
Take care, everyone. Be well.